Je tham je ngo re tang chen khor kun je chap ta ka den song pa me ba den chen sa ve la me chap je pe mo da re me chen zhe ma dang zha wa la go pe rab de dok de gu be sa thar chen jap nye wan che wo sen je la pan de he de so kang ge char san ta ve me ngor ke san zhen pe da da hen chen be sen de ze ho ba ve do kong me ke du ze jar Thúc Jin Dhamma Kunne Juren Jikti Sumje Khungcha Pa Thawang Pe Ma Ka Pe Sha Pe Tering Da Lu Yem So Kyo Orjin So Len Pe Men Tong Po Ne Jar Ve Nam Chon Do Khung Ga Ve Par Sin Dan Pe Ze Yung Tin Song Ba Ba Pe Ma Yung Ne Da Lu Pe Hen So Ro Kyo Da Tse To Ke Rik Pe Ma Nye Ri Chen Ting Mi Lam Jen Ching Wa Kun Ro Ne Nye Dung Ju Di Jan Le Len Ke Pa Rong Song Pen De Da La So Ra De Do Jen Chang Jin De Long Na Ro Da Mar Pa Ma La Chu Je Gam Po Pa Pa Mo De Pa Jar Wan Do Pa Ga Ju La Ma Nang La So Ra De Pa Den Za Ve La Ma Rum Po Je Ta Ken Chen Kar Pe Me Den Kyo Ne Ka Den Chin Pu Go Ne Je Zong Ve Ko So Tu Je Ngu De Za Har De So Shou Me Chu Je Yen Je Po Ra Ne De Sam Sang Je Kun Je Ngo Wa Ne Rang Sam Chu Ku Ngun Sam Tun Je Pa Za Ve La Me Xiao La So Ra De Yong Den Sang Je Kun Dang Nyam Na Yang Ka Den Sang Je Kun Le La Kwen Kong Za Ve La Me Xiao La So Ra De Da So Lo Ve Lo Na Ju La Je Re Ne Lo Ju La Je Wa Sen Shen Je Lo De Pa Nam Je Lo Ju Sen Do Wa Sen Je La De So Chu Lam Den Do Wa Sen Je La De So Lam Chu Wa Ser Wa Sen Je La De So Chun Han Ye Xi Sen Che Wa Sen Je La Ban Ze De So Gang Da So Je Tong Gen Je Tin Na De Ke Chu Lo Ma Je Wa Gang So Da Yen De Den Be Che Jen Chan Be Be Sin Ban De Ban Tam Jen De Ye Ye He Nam Mo Ha Ya Dang Ba La Ye Ge Dang Lo Dang Ne Jin Ke Rum Da Dang Ma Ye Ge Nang Dang Do Wa Kun Je Da Ke Je Dang Ba Tam Che Ke Do Da Ke Chu Je Do Rinpoche Kong Di Kong Natsa Lama Ong Goje Jun Sin De Ne
Lama Munsel Rinpoche became my root master through the kindness of His Eminent Garchen Rinpoche. Garchen Rinpoche spent a long time with Lama Munsel in prison, and during those years Garchen Rinpoche discovered the great quality, the compassionate and loving nature of Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche. So Garchen Rinpoche received many great Dharma teachings and instructions from him and then put them into practice. And within the prison, Garchen Rinpoche achieved many great experiences and realization. In 1979, Garchen Rinpoche was freed from the prison. At that time, Garchen Rinpoche told Tragar Rinpoche that he would like to go back to Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche, and Garchen Rinpoche wanted Tragar Rinpoche to accompany him. But Garchen Rinpoche couldn't go for few more years because his monastery was in a very bad shape, and the people in the village had been deprived of Dharma teachings. They had lost connection with the Dharma altogether. So people there begged Garchen Rinpoche not to leave them. And because they had a very long period of time without Dharma, they showed very strong devotion and interest in the Dharma. So therefore Garchen Rinpoche had to spend some years with them. And Garchen Rinpoche has always been the caretaker of the monastery as well as the people. In all kinds of difficult times, the only person they can approach is Garchen Rinpoche. So at the age of 30, with Garchen Rinpoche, he went to see Khenpo Munsel. It was quite tough for Garchen Rinpoche and all the monks to restore the monastery. It was not easy because most of the senior monks had passed away and the new ones had given up their vows and they had most of them got married and they had family and children. So there was a very big gap, and then Garchen Rinpoche started to ordain young monks, and some of the monks who had given up the vow, Garchen Rinpoche brought them back in the monastery and renewed their vow. When these changes were going on, Garchen Rinpoche worked closely with all other Kagyu Lamas in Nangchen. Nangchen is part of Kham. It's one region in Kham, and in this region most people follow the Kagyu lineage, such as the Digung Kagyu and Drukpa Kagyu and Kama Kagyu. So there used to be one master by the name of Nangchen Ade. Nangchen Ade was a great master from the Drukpa Kagyu lineage, and he had also been in prison with Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche. Nangchen Ade recommended Khenpo Munsel to Garchen Rinpoche for restoring the Vinaya, the monastic vows. Nangchen Ade said that Khenpo Munsel is a pure monk. He has been in prison and he has always kept his vows without any breakage. He thought that Khenpo Munsel is the right, authentic person to receive the vows. So finally, some monks from the Drukpa Kagyu monastery, headed by Khenchen Ade, and some monks from the Garchen monastery, actually 5 monks headed by Garchen Rinpoche, altogether 54 monks, set out for Golok. Golok is the place where Khenpo Munsel lived. It took 4 days by vehicle for them to reach from Nangchen to Golok. Usually it takes less than that from Nangchen to Lhasa. So it's Golok is a place very far from where Garchen Rinpoche and Tagar Rinpoche lived. All of these 54 monks, including Tagar Rinpoche and Garchen Rinpoche and so forth, received the monastic vows from Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche. And at the end of this ceremony, most of the monks decided to go back to their monasteries, but six of them wanted to stay back and practice under Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche. At that time, Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche was living in a very isolated place in the mountain of Golok, and there were monks from other monasteries come to practice under him, from Taling Monastery, Tarthang Monastery, Talak Monastery, and also there were some abbots and some Rinpoches too who had come to receive teachings from Khenpo Munsel. At that time he was teaching Tekchö, the practice of cutting through solidity. It's a part of Dzogchen teaching, and also he was teaching some techniques to practice the channel wind and drops to them. So when the 6 of them requested Khenpo Munsel for teachings, Khenpo Munsel said, it's okay, I can teach you, I can be your teacher, but before you receive advanced teachings, it is necessary for you to practice the 100-day preliminaries. He told them, in order to receive the more advanced teachings, it's important to have cleaned yourself of bad karmas and afflictions and defilements, which can be done through the 100-day preliminary practices. Without that, if you try to go straight to the advanced practice, then he told them it would be just tiring job without much benefit. Khenpo Munsel also told them, in this place it's very hard to live, and they had just received the vows, and Khenpo Munsel advised them not to eat dinner for 4 days, and after that he allowed them to eat dinner. Actually, in that area, it was very hard to find food. Khenpo Munsel told them that even I don't get enough food. Sometimes I have to skip my meals. So it will be tough for you to, stay here and practice. But if you can, if you think you can do it, I'm more than happy to teach you. So he received the instructions and practiced the 100-day preliminaries. At that time, it took him about 1 year, actually, to practice that. He did those practice for 1 year. So the other disciples of Khenpo Munsel told Tagal Rinpoche and his friends that now Khenpo Munsel is, very open in terms of teaching. At this point of his life, his wisdom is fully kind of awakened, and he is teaching quite, freely. But there comes a stage, there comes a point in a practitioner's life when they stop teaching. So the other monks told Tagal Rinpoche and his friends that this is a very good time that you came, when he's freely teaching. Gradually, there appeared more and more disciples. So Khenpo Munsel decided to move down from the mountain to a lower place, which was quite wide and spacious. And this place was prophesied by, someone to Khenpo Munsel, and Khenpo Munsel considered that place to be very special and a place which can host people who are beneficial for the Dharma. When he and his disciples moved down, the Chinese government did not give them permission to build monastery. They did not give the permission to move. So they tried to stop them, and they tried to even come to that place, but on the way they got some accident. Their cars were rolled over, and they couldn't really manage to reach there. So somehow they couldn't stop. So Khenpo Munsel and his monks were successful finally to set up the place. Without going into the way of his teaching, if he talk about the good qualities of Khenpo Munsel that he discovered and heard from people. When Khenpo Munsel was a baby, when he was in the laps of his mother, there was one great Dzogchen master called Tashi Sungchok Dorje. So Tashi Sungchok Dorje was teaching Dzogchen to a group of people, including Khenpo Munsel's mother. And Khenpo Munsel was in her laps during the teaching. And at the time, Tashi Sungchok Dorje told the mother that this baby will become a great being, and he will dispel the darkness of the world. So that's how he got this name, Munsel. Mun meaning darkness, and sel meaning to dispel. The one who dispel the darkness. And then among Khenpo Munsel's disciples, there was one Khenpo by the name of Tenzin, and he was always pointing out, the great qualities of Khenpo Munsel to other friends. He used to say, "Can you see how accurately Khenpo Munsel can introduce you to the nature of mind? Can you see the difference? Is there any other person who can be so precise, accurate, in terms of introducing the self-awareness? There's no one who can be like him." So that's how one of his disciples, who was himself a great scholar and practitioner, used to say all the time. And Khenpo Munsel himself used to say that he was encouraged by his father to become a monk. His father was, according to Khenpo himself, his father was a very religious man, and he was very good, well-natured, and he had a very good heart, and he was very deeply devoted to the Dharma. And Khenpo also used to say that his brother, he had some siblings, and the brothers were very materialistic and right the opposite of the father. When Khenpo Munsel grew up, his father told him that when you were a baby, Tashi Sungchok Rinpoche said that you will become a great being. So his father said you should become a monk and practice the Dharma. And also his father told him that I don't want you to live in a monastery and live on what people offer to the monastery. His father told him that that is a very heavy debt, which is like a kind of defilement, which is an obstacle in the path. So therefore his father told him, you become a monk, receive the instructions, and stay at home and put them into practice. So accordingly, Khenpo Munsel became a monk and started to practice the Ngondro, the preliminaries. So Khenpo Munsel started to practice the 100-day preliminaries at home. And when he completed the 100 days, his father was very pleased, and he told Khenpo Munsel, now you have done well, and I'm not educated enough to teach you. I don't have much things to teach you. I would like to take you to a monastic college by the name of Kathok monastery. There, his father told him that there are great masters, great beings, so you can learn things from them. So it was when Khenpo Munsel was 18 when he joined the Kathok monastery for further studies. From in Kathok monastery, Khenpo Munsel spent about 5 years studying the Buddhist, philosophies. And after that, at the age of 24, Khenpo Munsel returned to Golok, his birthplace. And for 3 years, he taught in a monastery as an abbot. He taught the Dharma, mainly the philosophy. During his 5 years in Kathok monastery, Khenpo Munsel had to live on very little food. He had no enough food to live. So it was quite hard for him to be there. His brother, who was very materialistic, he was supposed to, visit him from time to time with provisions. And actually he did visit him. The Golok place has no lands, for cultivation. They are nomads, so they live on meat and butter and cheese and all this kind of dairy stuff. And Kathok was a different place. They had fields, they had vegetations, they had they could grow grains and this stuff. So when Khenpo Munsel's brother came from Golok to visit him with lots of meat and cheese and butter, the people in Kathok, wanted to buy them from him, because they had very little meat, very little butter, they had very little cheese, so he could make good money. So he sold most of the things, and he would give Khenpo Munsel very little, meat, very little butter. So that's why Khenpo Munsel had some problem. And the butter he got from his brother, Khenpo Munsel had to use for making a lamp, to read the text, like a candle, butter lamp. So he couldn't even eat that butter because he needed the light. So when Khenpo Munsel was studying Dharma, he always felt that it would be better to meditate than study the Dharma. So at that time there was a Khenpo in Kathok by the name of Gocha Temple. So Khenpo Munsel received the instructions of the 3 words that strike the vital point from him. And then he began to practice from time to time. And Khenpo Munsel in the beginning thought that he was able to meditate well, and he was very confident. And then later on he realized that there are a lot of thoughts coming in his mind. And he found out that there was almost no difference between his mind and the mind of ordinary people. He found them to be the same with lots of thoughts. And then when he discovered lots of thoughts coming in, he thought it's better to block the thoughts, So he tried very hard to stop thinking, and he tried to reject the thoughts for a while. And then later on he became very short-tempered, and he became very angry. So then he realized that the way he meditated was not correct. So he gave up meditation and continued to study the philosophy. So when he was studying in Kathok monastery, he was very competitive. He was always challenging. And later on, Khenpo Munsel used to tell his students, when you are studying the Dharma, when you are learning, you should try to be competitive. That is good, being competitive in the study. So of course it's still based on some kind of emotions, but it is temporarily good for learning. So when Khenpo Munsel was in Kathok monastery, he used to go through the whole teachings of the day once with his roommate, and then both of them used to go to sleep. And when the friend was deep asleep, Khenpo Munsel used to get up and go through the whole thing once again. So he was trying to be better than his classmate, better than his roommates. So that's how he studied. He was very hardworking, very competitive, and very soon he became the assistant abbot in Kathok monastery. He was also very intelligent. An assistant abbot is, in the morning the official abbot teach few pages from the text, and then later on the assistant abbot review with the other classmates. So actually that position is the first step to become a Khenpo. And then one day Zongsar Khense Chugilodo, Jamyang Khense Chugilodo, the former one, visited the Kathok monastery, and then he took a test. He tested all the monks. It was a kind of examination. So during that time, Jamyang Khense announced among the monks that Khenpo Munsel has really understood the Dharma, and he has very good, excellent knowledge of the Dharma. And that's how he became, known as a scholar, as a person with good knowledge of the Dharma. But most of his friends did not understand that, because usually he was not particularly, outstanding. Usually Khenpo Munsel was not, he was one of those monks, and they didn't think that he was better than them. But Jamyang Khense told everyone that Khenpo Munsel was the best. That's because he used to study, secretly. He was not the way his friend had thought. The root master of Khenpo Munsel was Kyamgon Gyaltse. When Khenpo Munsel was still in Kathok monastery, Kyamgon Gyaltse, paid visit to the Kathok monastery. And at that time, he just felt that Kyamgon Gyaltse was the root guru with whom he had connection from many lives. So in Kathok monastery, usually they had a rule to enter the temple. First, the first ones to enter the temple was the Rinpoches, the emanations, then the Khenpos, and then the ordinary monks. But when Kyamgon Gyaltse was in the shrine room to preside the monks, everybody just rushed in the temple. So they did not follow the rule that day. So because of that, Khenpo Munsel managed to find a seat right in front of Kyamgon Gyaltse. And at that time, the moment Khenpo Munsel saw Kyamgon Gyaltse's face, and the moment he heard his voice, his heart just said, or he felt that this is my root Lama, and there was no doubt about that. And at that point, he for a while lost all his ordinary thoughts, and he was totally absorbed in a very blissful feeling. So on that day, just by hearing the voice of Kyamgon Gyaltse and seeing his face, Khenpo Munsel got introduced to the nature of his mind. And that introduction remained as it is for the whole day. Khenpo Munsel remained in that experience for the whole day. And at night when he went to bed, in the morning when he got up, he had lost that experience. And then afterwards, occasionally, that experience kept coming back. But it remained the same all the time. It did not kind of progress. The reason was because Khenpo Munsel did not know how to meditate on that. So and then when Khenpo Munsel was still in Kathok monastery, there was one Khenpo by the name of Khenpo Ngakchung. And Khenpo Munsel, who was not a Khenpo yet, requested Khenpo Ngakchung for the teachings of the whisper lineage. And Khenpo Ngakchung agreed, and said, this place of Kathok is very special. It's full of blessing because a lot of people have attained a rainbow body in this area. So it would be great if you receive the teachings of the whisper lineage here and then practice here in this place. That was the plan. But Khenpo Ngakchung was very busy. He had a lot of disciples and he had to teach them. So they didn't find the time to arrange the teachings and practice in Kathok. So Khenpo Ngakchung told Khenpo Munsel to come to another place, Nyoshu Gyomba. Khenpo Ngakchung was going to teach in that place. And Khenpo Munsel was asked to come there to receive the teachings of the whisper lineage. And when Khenpo Munsel was receiving these teachings, Khenpo Munsel told Khenpo Ngakchung about the experiences he had received, from Kyamgon Gyaltse, a blissful experience, the introduction to the nature of mind. And at the time, Khenpo Ngakchung said, your experience makes it clear that Kyamgon Gyaltse is your Lama with whom you have connection from many lives. So he is your root Lama. And also Khenpo Ngakchung said that, I hope really strongly that, you will become a person who will benefit the Nyingtik teachings, who will, make the Nyingtik teachings flourish. And these were the advices he received from Khenpo Ngakchung. And Khenpo Ngakchung taught him all the instructions, gave him all the instructions on Tekchö, the yoga of cutting through solidity. And also Khenpo Munsel received all the teachings from the treasure of, all the treasure teachings, all teachings from the Nying Thik, or the heart essence teachings. And also he received transmissions and empowerments of the 4 Herukas, or the 4 fathers, and received the teachings from the 7 treasures, like the treasure of the basic expanse of all phenomena and so forth. These books are now translated in English. And also he taught his monks in his monastery, Kunkor monastery. And then when he was receiving all the treasure teachings from Zabdru, Lama Zabdru of the Dalak monastery, he also received from the same master the instructions of Thogal. Thogal meaning transcending the pinnacle. That's the practice after Tekchö. So Khenpo Munsel had received all the instructions to practice Tekchö from Khenpo Ngakchung, and from Zabdru Rinpoche he received the Thogal instructions, and both of those instructions he put into practice for 7 years. Continuously, he made a promise to practice for 7 years. Khenpo Munsel made a vow, he took a vow to practice Thogal continuously for 7 years. And he had already completed 6 years, and he was going through the 7th, the last year, when the Chinese, invaded that area. The Chinese, when they first came there, they brainwashed the, citizens. They told them that, you shouldn't respect the people from, royal families. You shouldn't respect the Rinpoches, the high authorities. You are all equal, and you deserve to be respected. And they kind of, brainwash all the people. And they send a woman and some other people to Khenpo Munsel's retreat cell to disparage him, to bring him out and put into prison. So this woman came to Khenpo Munsel and then hit him and spit, on him and cursed him, and she did the worst things. At that point, Khenpo Munsel couldn't believe it, but he was not angry at all. He did not even for a moment conceived some harmful thoughts towards that lady. So anyway, they finally, arrested him in the retreat cell and put into prison without any reason. The allegation on Khenpo Munsel was that he was born in a very good family, a royal family, and he was the head of a religious group. That was the problem. That's why he was arrested. They arrested him, they took him to the capital. Yushutu is the capital. And then they were classifying the prisoners. They put those who were to be given death penalty in one side, life imprisonment in one side. So they put Khenpo Munsel among the death penalty, class. They just announce and they finalize everything, and they just set the time to execute the people. So that night, Khenpo Munsel, when he was in his bed, and in the morning when he got up, in front of his pillow there was a piece of stone, and that stone had some kind of white stripe, not drawn, but the stone itself had this design. So that was a little bit unusual, and Khenpo Munsel thought it may be some kind of protection from non-human or whatever. So Khenpo Munsel felt some connection with that stone. Anyway, he just took that stone and kept it with him. And then later, people told him that, so and so people have been already killed, and now they're, killing everyone turn by turn. And he was also one of them. When it was about his time to be executed, they reassessed Khenpo Munsel's, deeds, and they told that, you have been a religious leader, you have been one of those people who look down, on the ordinary people. So we are going to take you to Ziling, which was a bigger city, to execute. You deserve to be executed in a place where there are more people. So they changed his date and decided to take him further. When they decided to move Khenpo Munsel to Ziling, Khenpo Munsel thought, the stone was something very special, and he didn't want to take it with him. So it was sure that he was going to be killed. So he had a friend who was also in the prison. He gave this stone to the friend and told him, you can keep this stone, this is very special. And so Khenpo Munsel left and he arrived in Ziling. And before his execution day, that prisoner had come back to that prison for some reason. He had also been, transferred to Ziling. And Khenpo Munsel met him and he said, that friend was not going to be executed. He had not so big, crime. So Khenpo Munsel asked him, where's the stone? And he said, I don't know. When you gave me the stone, it just disappeared. I don't even know where I put it. It was with me, and then I lost it. So, okay. Then Khenpo Munsel that night went to bed, and the next morning, he found the same stone in front of his pillow. So that stone was somehow connected with, Khenpo Munsel's freedom from the execution. So in prison, there was a lot of hunger and thirst and very, very little food. Khenpo Munsel thought the food is not enough anyway. So it would be better, skip the dinner, which is part of the practice. And he thought, if I skip the dinner, then at least there will be some merit. Even if I eat the meal, it's not going to fill my stomach. So he thought this way, and he began to skip his meals. And then he got very, very weak, and then he got very sick. And then they put him in the category of sick prisoners. He had to work very hard and had almost nothing to eat or drink. So that made him very weak and sick. He began to lose his vision, and he lose all his physical strength. And then he became lame, so he couldn't walk properly. So one day he went to toilet, and then when he stood up from the toilet, he just couldn't support his body because his body was too weak, and he just fell down and he fainted away. And then when he recovered, when he regained consciousness, he got a vision of Khenpo Ngakchung. He got this experience. He got a vision of Khenpo Ngakchung, and Khenpo Ngakchung told him in the vision that this is not the time for you to die. You will survive all these ordeals. You will live more, and you will. In the future, there will be a time when people can teach Dharma, practice Dharma, and you will be, very important in that time to teach. So this is not the time for you to die. After having this vision, Khenpo Munsel wanted to make Ghana Chakra offering to his lamas, and it was not allowed. It was against the law, but he tried to do it secretly. and he collected some little food from his friends, very little, like sweets and this stuff, and then he made Gana Chakra offering. And after that he began to feel better and better, and sometimes he got the experience of participating in a Gana Chakra offering with his lamas, and he just mentally, felt satisfied, and he felt like, he's full. And then he was like taken care of by a doctor in the prison because he was sick, and the doctor was very kind to him, because the doctor discovered that Khenpo Munsel was a very great being and a very compassionate being. So the doctor finally received teachings from him, and then secretly the doctor took care of him, and that's how he got better and better physically. And then also around the prison there was one old Chinese man, and this Chinese man grew great faith in Khenpo Munsel, and he received many teachings secretly from him and put them into practice. And it's said that Chinese old man attained a rainbow body. Later on, the doctor in the prison became a very faithful student of Khenpo Munsel, and he wanted to play some tricks to free Khenpo Munsel from the prison. So he just pretended that he was now tired of Khenpo Munsel. He told the authorities in the prison that Khenpo Munsel is so sick and he is good for nothing, and keeping him in the hospital is just a waste of medicine and food. So he said he cannot work, he cannot do anything. Instead of keeping him in this prison, if we send him back to his house, then his brothers and sisters will look after him, and the government of China do not have to spend the money for his medicine and his food and stuff. And also he said, Khenpo Munsel is so weak and he's useless, and he cannot do anything. So this is how the doctor always kind of complained, and he said, he pretended that he did not like Khenpo Munsel. After a lot of attempts by the doctor like this, the authority decided to send him back to his village. 2 years before his fixed years in prison, 2 years in advance, he was freed. So he went to the village, and then secretly he gathered some young people, some young monks, and then he secretly began to teach the words of my perfect teacher. And then in that village there was another Chinese authority, and he came to know about that, and he wrote a letter to the prison authority mentioning about what Khenpo Munsel was doing. And he complained in the letter and said, Khenpo Munsel has not changed his mind. He does not think like the communist way. He still thinks like the past way. So therefore he deserved to be put back into prison. So at that point there was some changes going on in the policy in the government. Everybody was very busy talking about the changes. At that time the high authorities did not pay much attention because of that, because they were too busy, and that's how they finally didn't put him back into prison. Today we have already crossed the usual time. There are more stories about Khenpo Munsel. Maybe next week we can continue. So there are many more interesting stories about Khenpo Munsel. Some stories Tagar Rinpoche himself witnessed, and some stories he heard from other disciples. Last week I was talking about Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche's life story, and I couldn't finish the story, so today I'm going to continue telling the remaining part of the story in a distance of 1 day walk from Khenpo Munsel's place, there was a family, and that family had an old woman. One day, this old woman went out to bring her kettles home, and then she did not return. And 1 day passed, she did not return, and 2 days passed, she did not return, and 7 days passed, and she did not return. So people began to search her, and they couldn't find her anywhere. And then they just thought maybe she jumped in a river, or maybe some beast killed her. And they just thought maybe she's no more. And then they came to Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche asking him to pray for her. Khenpo Munsel used to make a sur offering every day. Sur offering means it's made out of sugar and yogurt and tsampa mixed, and then you put it in the fire and you offer the smoke for living beings who can only smell, who can live on the smell. So that was Khenpo Munsel's one of daily practice. When these people came up to Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche and asked him to pray for that old lady, he told them, okay, I usually do this prayer, this offering, and I will think about her during my prayers. And then later on, this old lady was found. And when she was found, she told that when Khenpo Munsel was playing the little cymbal during the sur prayer, she could hear that sound. She could hear the sound of his instrument. And as soon as she heard the instrument, her body became very heavy and she couldn't walk anymore. And she was forcibly being led by some non-humans. And she said that when her people came looking for her, she could see them, but they couldn't see her, because those beings, those spirits, did something, to cover her, and that's why nobody could see her. According to her, when she returned, when she recovered from that problem, she said she was being, forcibly taken by some beings to a certain place. And when she heard this symbol, when she heard the sound of Khenpo Munsel's instrument, she became very heavy physically, and she couldn't walk, fast enough to catch those beings. So then they said, okay, now you're not able to, walk fast enough. You should ride on this horse. So they brought a horse, and actually that horse was a river nearby, and that river appeared to her as a horse. And she was like being pursued, being forced by those beings to ride on the horse. That means like jumping in the water. And she was about to ride the horse, and then suddenly she saw a monk, and this monk said, "Don't ride on the horse." And this monk threw something on her, and that stuff she couldn't recognize. When it hit on her thigh, her thigh got some problem, some sort of pain, and she couldn't manage to ride on the horse, and she just fell back. And then that was her experience, okay? And nearby that place, there were some shepherds. There were real shepherds. So these shepherds saw this old woman lying on the side of the river. And then these shepherds went to her, and she was completely crazy and sick. So these shepherds sent the message to the family and told them that the woman is here. And the family members said, "We looked in that area for so many days, everywhere. We couldn't find. How could she be there?" And they said, "No, she's there." And they went and they found her. and she was not a human being anymore. She was totally crazy, and she was talking nonsense, and she had lost her mind. So they couldn't cure her, and finally they decided to take her to Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche, who lived in a distance of 1 day walk by horse. So when she was brought to Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche, Khenpo Munsel did some prayers for her, and it was a kind of way to free her from that spirit. And when Khenpo Munsel did the prayer, she kind of fell down and fainted away. And when she recovered, when she regained consciousness, she came up like her ordinary self. She was not crazy anymore. And then she began to tell all this story, what she saw when she was possessed by the spirits. And Khenpo Munsel used to always say that in meditation there are many great experiences to achieve, such as the experience of clarity and bliss, and experience of thoughtlessness. When this experiences takes place, gradually, you can also achieve some clairvoyant power. Khenpo Munsel himself achieved clairvoyant power at one time. It was when he was praying for a monk who he was with another friend of him. Both of them were praying for a monk who had just passed away. And in that place, in that house where they were doing the prayer, there was a container for embers, container for fire. In Tibet, where they have a special container where they put the embers, and then they put the tea on that to keep it warm. Usually the container is made of clay. They make it out of clay and then they burn it. So that was very attractive, the container. And in Tibet, people really like the container of the embers. And the monk who was with Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche became attached to that container, and he was always thinking about it, and thinking about how good it is, and he was thinking it would be great if I can have this, pot, this container. And Khenpo Munsel could clearly see his thoughts. He could see through his clairvoyant power what he was thinking about. He was saying the prayer with him, but he was he was always thinking about the container. So at the end of the prayers, it took 7 days for them to do the whole prayers. At the end of the prayers, the owner of the container offered the container to Khenpo Munsel and the monk, for both of them. At that point, Khenpo Munsel gave the container to the monk, his companion, and said, you have been thinking about it for a long time, now you take it. And he was blushed, and he felt embarrassed. So at that point, he showed that he had clairvoyant power. Another time, Khenpo Munsel demonstrated his clairvoyant power. It was when he was doing a summer retreat with his nephew. Summer retreat means they call it the rainy season retreat. So it was in the middle of the night. Khenpo Munsel and his nephew, both of them were in the house, asleep. They were asleep. And then suddenly, in the middle of the night, Khenpo Munsel got up and he began to, get ready to pray. And his nephew thought what he's doing. So he also got up and asked Khenpo Munsel what he was doing. And Khenpo Munsel said, no, you don't need to know that, just go back to your bed and sleep. You don't need to know this. And then his nephew said, if you are not telling me what you're doing, I'm not going to bed. And then he said, I heard a woman saying, Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche, please, help me. He said, I feel in the village maybe somebody died. So that's why I'm going to do a poa. practice. And then Khenpo Munsel did the power practice in the middle of the night. And the next day, early morning, 2 men came to Khenpo Munsel. They were riding on a horse. They came to Khenpo Munsel and told him that one woman passed in their family, and at the moment of death, she was saying, Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche, Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche. There was one of the, in the place of Khenpo Munsel, there was a family, and one member of the family went on a journey and did not return for 2 years. So the other family members had no idea about where he was, what he was doing, and he was not returning at all. So they thought maybe he passed away or he died somewhere. So they came to Khenpo Munsel and asked him to do powa for that man. And Khenpo Munsel right away, sat straight and did the powa visualization. And then suddenly he said, no, I don't need to perform this powa because he's not dead. And he just, stopped halfway. And then that man came home after some days. And actually when Khenpo Munsel was doing that visualization, that man was on his way back home. And he was in a border, and he was with some friends, and they had made tea and they were having tea. And when this man was trying to have his tea with his cup, suddenly, the cup fell down from his hand, and for a while, he kind of felt unconscious. And at that point, he suddenly thought about Khenpo Munsel. And then his friends told him, what happened to you? What are you doing? His cup dropped from his hand and he kind of fell down. And he said, I don't know, I just don't remember anything other than Khenpo Munsel. I was just thinking about Khenpo Munsel for some unknown reason. That was one of the incident considered very special by Khenpo Munsel's disciples. The 2 occasions about the clairvoyant power that Rinpoche just told was not witnessed by himself. He heard from other disciples. What he witnessed himself is one time Khenpo Munsel Rinpoche was teaching about the Western Pure Land, Sukhavati, in a certain place. And when he was doing the teaching, one day he got a vision in the east. It was in the eastern direction, and he saw a stupa, which was of white, brilliant stupa. So at that time, Khenpo Munsel said, I had this vision, and it may mean that there is a great being incarnated in that area. It could mean that. That's what Khenpo Munsel told. And then he continued his teachings. And then suddenly there was a wind, the wind came. And then the wind blew one page from his text. And this text just rolled in the wind and landed at one little child. And then Khenpo Munsel wanted to know about that child. And when the child was brought to him, parents said that the child performed some unusual, he did some certain things unusual, some kind of siddhis, he had, ordinary siddhi he had. So finally the kid was recognized by Khenpo Munsel as an extraordinary being. He was not recognized as a particular reincarnation, but he was recognized as an extraordinary being. So he was finally brought to Khenpo Munsel's monastery. And then Thakur Rinpoche had a nephew, and he had a camera. And at the time in Tibet, to have a camera was like being very rich. It was very rare to find a camera in that area. So his nephew just teased that little boy and said, if you perform a miracle. He was famous for performing miracles. So he said, if you perform a miracle, I will give you this camera. And he said, no, I'm afraid of Khenpo Munsel. I don't want to do that. And then later on, when other people asked him, again and again to perform miracle, he made a knot on a needle. That's what he witnessed. He took a needle and he made a knot out of the needle. The needle, he just turned around the needle and made a knot, like a thread. Okay, Tadila. So there was a Khenpo by the name of Tenzin. One day, early morning, he went to Khenpo Munsel's room and peeped through the door, and Khenpo Munsel was still asleep. When he peeped through the window, Khenpo Munsel was asleep, and he had covered his head with a very thick blanket. And Khenpo Tenzin just, turned back and very quietly walked away. He didn't want to disturb Khenpo Munsel. But then when he walked away a few steps, he heard Khenpo Munsel saying something. So, but he didn't return. He just went off. And later, he asked Khenpo Munsel's attendant about what he did. And he asked Khenpo Munsel's attendant if Khenpo Munsel had said something to him that time. And his attendant said that Khenpo Munsel could see him coming while he was asleep. At that point, he kind of proved his practice of clear light. He was able to transform his sleep into clear light. And that is why even when his head was covered, fully covered, and he was asleep, but he could still see Khenpo Tenzin coming to him. Another time, the monks were celebrating Tibetan New Year, and they were all in a tent. And then they invited Khenpo Munsel in the tent to make offerings. And Khenpo Munsel came, and then he accepted the offerings. Suddenly he said, now all of you have to leave this tent because Wadi is coming. Wadi was a nun, disciple of Khenpo Munsel. Khenpo Munsel was like in the tent. He couldn't see, Wadi, nobody could see Wadi, but somehow he just, in the middle of the conversations, he said, now all of you have to leave because Wadi is coming. And everybody left the tent. And then Wadi was coming from a few yards away. Wadi was coming with some milk in her hand to offer to Khenpo Munsel. And when she reached nearby the tent, Khenpo Munsel didn't come out. He was still inside. And he said, Wadi, you come in. So at that time, Thakur Rinpoche got convinced, that Khenpo Munsel had the power to see through things. And Khenpo Munsel was also always emphasizing, the importance of practice. Khenpo Tenzin had the responsibility to look after the monks in his monastery, so he couldn't practice much. And one day he decided to leave for central Tibet to practice, to free himself from those responsibilities. And he came to Khenpo Munsel to ask for permission to leave. And Khenpo Munsel told him, you can go to central Tibet, but you cannot stay there more than 3 years. After 3 years, you must come back to me. So Khenpo Tenzin went to central Tibet and he started meditating. And the first year was excellent. He didn't talk to anyone for the whole year, and he did well in the practice. The second and third year was not very well. So he came back to Khenpo Munsel and he told what happened to him to Khenpo Munsel. And then Khenpo Munsel told him to be diligent, perseverant in practice. He said, I'm very old compared to you, but I get up, early in the morning and meditate until late at night. And at the time he removed his robe and he showed him his buttock. Buttock? It was hard, like stone, because of continuous meditation. And he said, you should work as hard as this. There are many more amazing stories about Khenpo Munsel, but mainly Khenpo Munsel could read the minds of his disciples. That was the most extraordinary power he had. And in his teachings, he always taught about the importance of ethical conduct. He considered ethical conduct as the most excellent sign of accomplishment, most extraordinary siddhi. Chagme Rinpoche used to say too that moral ethic, one who can abide by that, has this supreme siddhi. And also Khenpo Munsel advised over and over again his disciples about the danger of being attached to worldly objects, worldly life, worldly concerns. He always advised his disciples to train themselves in renunciation, to have less desire, to have the sense of contentment. And on top of that, he always emphasized the practice of Dharma. He used to say, the Dharma is of the great perfection, Dzogchen Dharma. But if you are not a Dzogchen practitioner, then just because the Dharma is Dzogchen, it doesn't make any difference. So you have to become a Dzogchen rather than you trying to do Dzogchen practice. He said you have to embody the teaching by practice. Every year at the end of teachings, Khenpo Munsel received offerings from his disciples and he would accept them. But Khenpo Munsel wouldn't accept the money given by others to do dedication prayers, to do other kinds of prayers. He wouldn't accept those kind of money. And the money he received as mandala offering, he used to collect all the money every year and then divide the money into three. One portion for Samye Monastery, one portion for Kathok Monastery, and one portion for Nyushul Monastery. And through Khenpo Munsel's donation, in Samye Monastery, they opened a monastic school for the monks to study philosophy. And then from Nyushul Monastery, they used his donations to publish Khenpo Munsel's own teachings. This is how he used to live, very simple. He had just one set of dress and few utensils, and that's all. He wouldn't collect materials, he wouldn't collect money, and he would advise the monks not to collect materials, not to collect money. And when people offered the Sangha some money to do prayers, he asked the Sangha to divide the money right away and don't collect it in the monastery. Divide it and finish it on the spot. He didn't want that money to be collected and then later on misused. Khenpo Munsel, at the age of 79, Khenpo Munsel passed away, and it was in 1993. At that time, Chaga Rinpoche was in Nepal, and not long after Khenpo Munsel passed away, one of his disciples, Khenpo, came to Nepal, and Chaga Rinpoche asked this Khenpo about what happened during his death. This Khenpo told him that on that day there was a, you call it moon eclipse, and then he checked in the calendar, and the calendar did not mention about moon eclipse on that day, but the moon in Tibet people could see kind of moon eclipse in Tibet that day, and then his body became very small, and then on the nails of his big toe and small toe there were self-erasing ah and hum and these kind of syllables. And the whole area, it was in the winter, and the whole area turned very warm, and because it was so warm, in the winter there were some sprouts on the ground, some little flowers, little greeneries. And when they looked in the scriptures, when they looked into the descriptions of having a moon eclipse at the time of death and having this and so forth. It was a sign of achieving a rainbow body. And also he heard from others that the year before Khenpo Munsel passed away, when he was thinking about passing away, Khenpo Munsel wrote him a letter asking him not to pass away so soon, asking him to live more for the benefit of others. At that time, Khenpo Munsel was sick, and people thought he was going to die. And then, at the same time, when Khenpo Munsel requested him to live long, in that area appeared an unusual bird, and this bird was never seen in that area before. And this bird just hung around for several days and flew away and disappeared. At the time, Khenpo Munsel said, he said that, looks like the protectors of the Nyingma lineage, some of them appeared to him and asked him not to die. That's why he said, I am not going to die for another 1 year. And then he died exactly the next year. These were some extraordinary things about Khenpo Munsel noticed by his disciples. And there are more extraordinary qualities about Khenpo Munsel that are unknown. Usually in Khenpo Munsel's room, there was a very, very pleasant fragrance. As you step in his room, it smells so good. There is a very great fragrance permeated in his room. And that was the fragrance of his moral ethic. He became a monk at a very young age, and till the end of his life, he did not transgress any vows. And because of that, we call it the fragrance of moral ethic. And in his actions, he was always free from the 8 worldly concerns. He was always perfect in his actions. So therefore, his disciples look at these situations as something very extraordinary, that he has been a perfect monk all his life, and he was never involved in the worldly concerns. So we stop here.
Sa